Now, if you look at the series of scandals we have had in Britain with the misapplication of human rights law to protect from being deported criminals, rapists, whatever, on the most spectacularly trivial ground, there it is. If you look at the cases where our judicial system and our system of protection of the citizen has collapsed absolutely, the case of the Southport murderer, Ruda Cabana, Kalokane, the man, I've now forgotten where, who just murdered people in the streets. These were people who were evidently severely mentally sick. In any sane society, they would have been in protective custody from the age of about 13. But oh no, they have human rights. Since he's been imprisoned, what has Ruda Cabana done? He has thrown boiling water at his prison guards because, of course, he's got a human right to have a cup of hot tea. This is demented. This is simply demented. But again, it's the problem when you give judges the ability to determine what is really the public interest without the overarching framework of political judgment. No judge should have the right to say, I will simply set aside considerations of public safety on the grounds of the... We're not talking now about whether somebody is guilty or innocent. That is, obviously, that is a matter for the judicial process. But what we're talking about is saying whether ordinary legal process should or should not be set aside on grounds of some abstract right, and we ignore the whole question of the Latin phrase, salus populi suprema lex, that the safety of the people, it should be the supreme consideration. We've thrown all this aside. And so what we've done then is we've created a situation in which the power of Parliament is severely eroded by the quango on the one hand, and then by a judicial system which elevates abstract notions above the reality of ordinary human relations. Again, there's something else that not simply is the Human Rights Act is the problem. The particular example is the Equality Act. The Equality Act is completely demented. It takes... imagine you have an Act of Parliament with the title of a single abstract noun. Who voted for equality? We're not equal. There's a profound degree of difference between human beings. What you need, the only equality which makes sense, is a notion of equality before the law. But if you actually look at the attempt at forcing equality, not simply between human beings, but in the worst possible idea, different categories of human beings, because that's what the Equality Act tries to do. It says that men and women should be paid the same amount of money. Absolutely fine. You can measure that with the same job. But it says, oh, that's not good enough. It decides that it can actually come up with a formula in which you can weigh jobs in which the majority of people doing them are men against jobs where the majority of people doing them are women. And how do you do that? The only way you can do it, believe it or not, the Equality Act has actually got a series of equations. An Act of Parliament with equations. And what these equations embody is the most discredited of all economic theories, which is the Marxist theory of the labour value. Let me get this right. It is the Marxist theory that labour has got an intrinsic value as opposed to what the market says it's worth. And what has been the result of that? That's why Birmingham has gone bankrupt. That we've got now judges determining that the wages that are paid to a group of dinner ladies has got to be comparable to the wages, because of women, has got to be comparable to the wages paid to a group of refuse workers who are men. And the result is compensation. The compensation to Birmingham of the women, as the female workers of Birmingham City Council, is going to total something like £700 million. And wages being set by judges. This is demented. Again, the Equality Act sets up two rival views of rights: the right of sex and the right of gender. One being a biological reality, the other a man-made fiction. Gender belongs in grammar. It only wanders out of grammar in the 1960s. And you get then this terrible clash over the right of biological women and pretend women, who are of course actually men. And what's very, very interesting, all of this was predicted at the time of the French Revolution. The French Revolution comes up with these fantastic notions of universal human rights and whatever. They never put it into practice because, of course, the moment you've drawn up these charters of universal human rights, you have the terror. So you've got to shove them all in a box and forget about them. But a brilliant Englishman writes about all of this, a man called Jeremy Bentham, denouncing the idea of universal human rights in 1795. And he comes up with this wonderful phrase: human rights are nonsense, and universal human rights are nonsense on stilts. They were great phrase makers. Anyway, and what he does, he points out, he, as it were, predicts what importing the European Convention and the Equality Act have actually done in England. He says, first of all, if you set up rival rights, you will have a politics of hysteria and violence. Look at what we've seen in the debate over transgenderism. This tiny little issue. I mean, let's be honest. What is a transgendered person? They are a Frankenstein's monster. And do you actually know? It's very important. Again, you were talking about mentioning unmentionable things. What is a man who's been given a vagina? What is that vagina? It is a permanently open wound that requires daily dilation. Absurd, preposterous. Absurd and preposterous. But you've set up that notion of womanhood against real biological womanhood with these intense rages, the rage of the cast of the Harry Potter films against the woman who invents it all. The lunatic amount of public energy and debate that's been devoted to this issue. He predicts that you'll get this politics of absurd sectarian violence. And the second thing he does, he says, how catastrophic is it to legislate abstract principles? Equality. By the way, we haven't finished with the absurdity of the Equality Act. Remember, it is that Equality Act which is both responsible for Birmingham, so absolutely buggering finance, and responsible, the same Act of Parliament, and responsible for the absurdities of transgenderism. Now, how about that as an achievement for one Act of Parliament? Now, well, the problem is we've lost reason in government. If you have a single piece of legislation that's responsible for that, what should you do with it? You should repeal it immediately. But of course, no, it's a matter of principle. That terrible word, abstract general ideas. I was very lucky. My mother was very fond of the word principle. She didn't believe in smacking me or anything. And I was an impossible, you can imagine, I was an impossible child to manage. And so everything was a matter of principle. So, and of course I was very good at winning arguments. So my poor woman, my poor mother was constantly sort of going, it's a matter of principle. So by the age of 6, I knew what a principle was. A principle is something you feel about so strongly that you won't listen to reason. Whereas, of course, listening to reason has to be the basis of all sensible human relationships. So,